Søren Kierkegaard was born on May 5, 1813, in Copenhagen, the son of a wealthy wool merchant. He studied at Copenhagen University during 1830 to 1840 and wrote a doctoral dissertation entitled On the Concept of Irony with Continual Reference to Socrates, which his examiners admired yet dismissed as insufficiently formal for an academic thesis. He was nevertheless awarded the equivalent of a master's degree. A year after taking his degree, Kierkegaard broke off his engagement to Regine Olsen, the beautiful and intelligent daughter of a Danish councilor of state. Clearly, Kierkegaard loved her but decided that his melancholy nature made it wrong for him to marry her. The broken engagement would haunt him and his philosophical works for the rest of his life. After breaking the engagement, Kierkegaard spent 2 years in Berlin and then returned to Copenhagen in 1843. He wrote Either or, 1843, which investigated problems of aesthetic versus ethical consciousness. This book may be the first work of existentialist philosophy, that is, a philosophical inquiry into how one lives as a single individual, grappling with concrete human reality, making life choices, deciding on commitments, and defining one's relationship to God. The first part of Either or deals with aesthetic experiences, the second part with ethics. Through fictitious narrators, Kierkegaard discusses how both love and the arts inspire the imagination, which produces aesthetic pleasure. The counter-argument is that living an ethical life creates a happiness that cannot be achieved through the aesthetic life. The curse of the aesthetic life is repetition, which inevitably dulls pleasure and creates boredom, the most common and painful human state. Ultimately, the debate between the aesthetic and ethical ways of life is adjudicated in a concluding sermon, the edification which lies in the fact that in relation to God we are always in the wrong. Humans, the sermon declares, whether the choices they make are motivated by aesthetics or ethics, are never in the right. The only escape is to accept that God is always right, attempt to do God's will, and you will avoid unhappiness.
Are you a philosophy student or just have a general interest in philosophy? Since ancient times, brilliant philosophical teachings and dialogues taught by great luminous minds have deeply elevated the way we think and live. The Complete Philosophy Primer is a comprehensive, organized, easy-to-read, and all-encompassing guide specifically written for students in their first college-level philosophy course, as well as anyone with an interest in philosophy. With this jam-packed philosophical guide, you will optimize your knowledge in philosophy, logic, ethics, its history, and branches. Learn philosophical concepts, term definitions, and biographies. Find lists of essential books, films, blogs, websites, and other resources. Improve your writing skills. Learn how to argue effectively. And most of all, learn how to be a better student. Order your copy today to philosophize your mind and illuminate your wisdom.
Later in 1843, Kierkegaard published Fear and Trembling, in which he extended the array of philosophical and psychological categories. He explored anxiety, despair, melancholy, repetition, inwardness, irony, existential stages, inherited sin, teleological suspension of the ethical, Christian paradox, the absurd, reduplication, universal or exception, sacrifice, love as a duty, seduction, and the demonic, to the subject of religious faith as an absolute relation of the individual with God. In a remarkable exegesis of Genesis 22, Abraham's near sacrifice of his son Isaac, Kierkegaard wrote of the teleological suspension of the ethical, in which religious faith enables one to believe that an unethical action, the murder of one's son, will result in a better end, and an acceptance of the absurd, the conflict between the urge to seek inherent value and meaning in life and the conviction of life's purposelessness. In 1849, Kierkegaard published The Sickness Unto Death, a work of Christian existentialism in which the concept of sin is wholly defined as the sin of despair. A person is in despair if he fails to align himself with God or God's plan for him. He loses not only God, but himself, or more accurately, his self. He is lost between the finite and the infinite, as well as the possible and the necessary. Because human beings are reflective and self-conscious, they require being both conscious of the self and conscious of being grounded in love, the Creator, which is God. To deny the self, or the power that creates and sustains the self, is to fall into the sin of despair. Kierkegaard was a sincere believer who nevertheless was perpetually unsure of his faith. He believed that human beings are by nature self-reflective, and that Christianity, in fact, demands self-examination and an existential transfiguration toward an absolute relation to the absolute, that is, God. He came to feel that conventional theology wrongly mediated and thus diluted his relationship, and for that reason, Kierkegaard began an increasingly public and rancorous attack on the Danish People's Church, the state church of Denmark. He accused that institution of essentially failing to facilitate the spiritual life of the individual who was looking to find a direct relationship with God. As the attacks became progressively more strident, he accused the church of attempting to replace the single individual with the crowd. The dispute consumed the philosopher utterly, and in September 1855 he suffered a collapse on the street and was hospitalized. Kierkegaard never recovered. He died in Frederiks Hospital on November 11, 1855.